Joining us now, Republican Congressman from the 9th District in Virginia, Oregon Griffith. Congressman Griffith, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas. Great to have you back.
It's great to be back. Happy New Year to you as well.
So within the chaos that went on, and we're going to talk about that, within the chaos on Monday with the Republicans, some of them trying to get rid of or reassign the Oversight Committee, which we went crazy over, by the way, sidebar, just so you know. Right in the middle of this, House Republicans decide to revive an obscure rule called the Holman Act that could allow them to slash the pay of individual workers to $1. Now, the federal workers and their unions and the Democrats going bananas over this, saying it's an assault on them, etc. And this rule, the revival of the Holman rule, was the brainchild of Congressman Griffith. Now, Congressman, explain your thinking in reviving the Holman rule, which I think was implemented, if I'm not mistaken, 1876, right?
That is correct. And what happened was I was frustrated when I first got here, and things moved slowly in Washington. And folks said, well, you can't do that. It's mandatory spending. You can't do this. You can't do that. And so I started looking for ways that I could make a difference and coming up with things, and identified that Rules 21, 2B, and C were a major impediment. And then, being the amateur historian that I am, I had an intern go and get me core samples of the rules going back to 1795 of the United States House of Representatives. So every few years, they'd get me a sample of the rules, and they brought it back, and I started going over it, and then found some language that I thought would be wonderful. It was only later I discovered that it was known as the Holman Rule, but it was great to use because it was good language. It's language that gives power to rank-and-file members of the United States House of Representatives, the People's House. And it says, we're supposed to be in charge of the purse strings. Let's have the power to go in if we need to, not willy-nilly, but in those cases where we need to, and take a look at programmatic spending, which we can do in a broad way, but now we can narrow it in a little bit more, to take a look at individual salaries, and to take a look at the number of employees an agency might have. And that's what the Holman Rule said in 1876 when they were trying to get spending back under control after the war between the states, and they ramped up federal spending and so forth. They said, we got to get this under control. 1876, the Holman Rule and the newly created Appropriations Committee were looking for tools where they could rein in federal spending. Well, from 1876, with one little brief glitch there in the early part of the 1900s, till 1983, this was the way the House operated. And the sky didn't fall, and there weren't all the horrible things that the Democrats are predicting that would happen. But what did happen was, in 1980, you might remember, we had a little election. Mm-hmm. And in the sessions in 81 and 82, the Reagan Republicans and conservative Democrats started cutting the budget. Well, Tip O'Neill didn't like that, and so they eliminated the Holman Rule in the beginning of the session in 1983. It was seen by the Republicans at the time as a political move, although the Democrats denied it. All we're doing is restoring that power to Congress, and I think it's appropriate. I don't think it will be Armageddon, as one person called it. But, if we have wasteful spending out there, if we have agencies with too many employees sitting around playing tiddlywinks, then we have an opportunity to go in there and say, you know what? The X division of the Y agency needs to shrink. And we have the power to do that now with the Holman Rule, which we didn't have before, which was just crazy because we have the purse string.
Right. So I want to read you the quotation you had in the article by Jenna Portnoy in the Washington Post yesterday. You said that basically you want to put the power back in the hands of Congress and not in the hands of federal bureaucrats, right?
Well, that's pretty much it, yes.
So, okay, let's take an example. So let's look at the Veterans Administration, which has been a disaster, as everybody knows, all sorts of corruption happening. Obama puts a new secretary in there, Secretary Robert McDonald, big fanfare. He was a GE guy. He was going to do all this stuff. He didn't do anything. You got all these employees running around. They're still not doing the right thing. They're still scamming the paperwork. Nobody's gotten fired. So essentially, under this Holman rule, as a real example that people can understand, Congress could go in and say, these are 25 employees who just are horrible, and we're going to cut their salary to $1.
This would give the United States Congress the power to do that. Whether it would happen or not, that's a whole nother story, because it would take a majority vote of both the House, which is more likely to do it, and, of course, the United States Senate, when you and I have discussed their rules and their problems before. But I can't fix the Senate. What I can do is work on fixing the House, and this is a step in the right direction. And I have to commend leadership for, A, listening, letting me discuss this. I have to say Speaker Boehner was never interested in this issue. Speaker Ryan immediately set up a group to listen to all these different ideas. And after listening to this idea and the debate on this idea, Speaker Ryan said, why don't we give it a try? So we've got a 1-year trial. We'll see how it works. But I think it's a great tool, and we have to use it in limited fashion, but it's a great tool for the United States Congress to get at problems similar to the one that you just described with the Veterans Administration. And yes, we could go in, and whether we wanted to make it $1 or make it, minimum wage, we could take employees who clearly had done something wrong, and if they can't be fired, we can limit the office's salary, the salary of the offices that they hold. I don't know that we could say that, Joe Smith's salary could be reduced, but we could say people who hold, this particular office, their salaries will be henceforth. This is not unusual, particularly you bring up the veterans issue.
Yep.
Lawyers can only receive $10 for helping veterans in their benefit claims.
Right.
That's been on the books for years. So limiting the amount of money is a tool that Congress has used in some fashions in the past. This is nothing new. It was used for over 100 years. I asked the reporters, I said, did the Democrats give you any examples when it was in existence for 100 years where horrible things happened and the sky fell in? And they just looked at me because the Democrats didn't come up with anything other than, Republicans are going to be evil and they're going to do a horrible thing. Not true. We want an efficient government and one that doesn't waste the taxpayers' dollars.
So the bottom line is, again, getting an example that people can identify with to break this down. You're in the Veterans Administration. You're incompetent. You've not done your job. You've hid paperwork. You can't get fired, even though we've passed legislation saying you could get fired. It just doesn't ever happen. So we keep footing the bill, and you basically say, okay, these offices, minimum wage, and then that employee that's making $100,000, $90,000 would now be making $8 an hour, would now be making $16,000 or $15,000. And if they feel like staying, fine, but chances are they would not. So you'd be able to get them out of there. Look, on the surface, it looks like a draconian measure, but in reality, when you cannot fire incompetent people from the government that are hurting the country they're supposed to serve, you have no other option.
Well, and that's what we want to have the ability to take a look at, but we also want to be able to get to, making the government as a whole more efficient. That's really the purpose. It's not to target any individual, but it's to make government more efficient overall.
So there's a level of federal employee accountability that would be inherent within the Holman rule, right? Just by the nature of it.
That is correct.
And that's
the mere
really
fact that we're talking about it, and that the Washington Post has written articles, that the Hill has written articles, and other publications have written articles, has federal employees concerned. And for those who have not been doing their job, I suspect this morning there's a little bit more effort to maybe pay attention to the concerns of the people of these United States.
Okay, so Jerry Connolly, your colleague in Virginia on the Democratic side in Northern Virginia, blasted you on this and said that it's a backdoor way of furthering Griffith's desire to dismantle that part of the federal government. True or false?
What part of the federal government? It's an attempt to make the federal government more responsive to the people and more efficient. It's that simple. And to give Congress the power that the Constitution gave us and that previous Congresses have given away, and that is control over the purse strings.
So that everyone knows, Barbara Comstock, your other colleague, Republican from the 10th District, was the only Republican member of Congress, who was the only Republican member of Congress in Northern Virginia that represents a lot of federal workers. She voted for an amendment sponsored by Representative Tom Cole of Oklahoma to strip the rule from the package. Did you have a conversation with her at all?
Barbara and I have not talked about that, but, I understand she's in a tough spot because people are out there saying things that aren't true. This often happens. You get a lot of false news situations going around. And, it's kind of interesting. I do want to comment on this, though, that some folks said this was a backdoor way of doing things. I have to tell you, I've been talking about it for years.
Mm-hmm.
We held a public hearing in the Rules Committee last spring. It's just interesting to me that the Democrats didn't figure this thing out a little sooner. They were, more worried about pontificating than paying attention to how you actually operate the House. And as a result of that, we've got a tool that I think we can use, that we can use effectively to make government more efficient over time. It'll take years, not going to happen tomorrow, but I think it will make more federal employees responsive to concerns of the people of the United States and to the United States Congress.
Look, I think this makes a lot of sense. We have to do something to change the trajectory of the growth and unaccountability of the federal bureaucracy. I think this is a step in the right direction, Congressman, and I commend your actions in making it happen. Let's get to the chaotic scene on Monday where coming into swearing in 55, I think, brand new members, which should have been a banner day for Republicans. Instead, you get embroiled in stripping the Oversight Committee, not you personally, but Republicans as a whole, trying to strip the Congressional Independent Oversight Committee and put it basically under the auspices of Bob Goodlatte's Judicial Committee so that you took all the teeth out of it. And it almost turned it into what we said the other day was a suggestion box where you put the little form in the box and that's the end of it. A lot of people like me were just outraged at that because we're talking about draining the swamp. And it's like, okay, this is the return of the swamp monsters. I can't understand how on the first day of the 115th Congress, how this could even come up.
Well, let me tell you, again, in this case, the Democrats were very effective in spreading things that weren't accurate. And while it may not have been the best PR, the organization that Bob Goodlatte, who was a friend of mine, was trying to put some due process into, not trying to strip it, just put due process into it, and it would have actually gone to the Ethics Committee, which Bob does not sit on, the oversight to make sure they were doing right, because that committee has gone a little crazy. They can make allegations against staffers, against congressmen, folks up here, with no basis. There's no due process involved, and so what Bob was trying to do was put some due process in. And when you hear some of the horror stories, which we need to get out to the public, but when you hear some of the horror stories, one congressman gave money to a charity through his charitable trust that he'd set up, a wealthy individual. And then there was some kind of a vote, and I don't know all the particulars, but some kind of a vote in Congress, which also would have benefited, this was the Girls and Boys Clubs. They launched an investigation. Now, understand, he didn't receive money from them. He was given money, being charitable, and because he was a congressman and chose to give money to a charity, they launched an investigation because of some anonymous complaint that might be inappropriate. You got to have some due process. So what we're hoping is that we can work it out with the Democrats and that everybody will realize that this is not some attempt to defang a truly righteous organization, but one that we just want to bring some due process in. We want, everybody to behave ethically. We want ethics violations to be brought to the attention of the appropriate officials, and if there's criminal conduct, for that to be prosecuted and go forward. But, you can't suddenly say that we're going to have a star chamber operation where leaks are made to the press, where people are run out of town based on allegations that have no merit, and nobody can figure out who actually made the complaint. And it costs these folks, particularly if you've got somebody who's not a wealthy congressman, it costs them, we heard stories, $200,000 to defend themselves against something that had no merit.
Was he exonerated?
So that's the concern. We want to bring some due process in. Better day maybe, but I can't criticize Bob for trying to bring due process and bring fairness into a system that a number of people, fortunately I have not had that issue yet. Maybe talking to you about it, they'll launch a complaint.
Perhaps it will, but let me.
I have not had that problem yet. But a number of people stepped forward, and apparently it's on both sides of the House, not just Republicans.
So
with these horror stories, so that's all that was going on. But Democrats were very wise. They seized on it as an attempt to lambaste the Republicans. And the president said, "Okay, let's not do this," and everybody said, "All right, but we've got to fix it. It's a problem."
So, in the example, Congressman Griffith, that you gave, was that congressman exonerated?
He was ultimately exonerated, but there were no press stories on that. And in fact, in that case, he said he got a letter of apology because, we probably shouldn't have investigated this in the first place. Well, why did you? Another congressman said that they leaked it to the press, and it was a media that didn't care for him, and it was like World War II ends headlines. That he was being investigated, and he had to spend a lot of time and money explaining to people that he ultimately was exonerated. Because it's kind of like when the newspaper gets it wrong and then they run the retraction.
Right.
Headline A1, when they run the story, the retraction is B3 in small print. And that's the problem. And so, we're public officials, our staff are semi-public officials. If they get accused of something, that makes the front page. When the letter comes out and says, yeah, there wasn't anything here, it doesn't get any news. And so your reputation has been sullied, and you then have to spend not only the money to defend yourself, but the money then to reestablish your reputation.
Congressman, the issue, though, is you get people that go to Congress and they have $25,000 net worth, all right? And then they come out and they're worth tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. And you say, how on earth does this happen? You go to be a public servant, you make $175,000. You got to spend money, obviously, to get an apartment at Washington. I mean, it's out of pocket and everything else. That's not a lot of money in today's thing if you're living out of town. But then people come out after 5 terms, 6 terms, 8 terms, and they're millionaires. And people say, how does this happen?
Yeah, and those are the things we do need to look at. We still, of course, have the House Ethics Committee, all the law enforcement agencies, and then this organization, which will continue, even under Bob's proposal, it would have continued. It just would have some due process put into it. We want to investigate when people are doing things wrong. I mean,
you got look.
I don't understand it. I mean, in my neck of the woods, the salary's big money. So don't get me wrong. You can find ways to save some of that, but you're right. You said you served 10 years. You went in with $25,000. If you walk out with $10 million, something's not right.
Well, you look. I mean, the best example is your former. You weren't there, but one of the former speakers of the House that replaced Newt Gingrich, who's now got other issues going on. But he came in. He was a high school wrestling coach at the time. He had a net worth of like $10,000 when he came in. He got all these deals done. He comes out, he's worth $100 million. And so you just shake your head at this stuff. I think that's what's driving people like me looking at this. And it really, I get what you're saying, but it really looked like an effort for Republicans to say, okay, now we're in control. And so now we're going to be sure that we don't do anything with the swamp. It didn't pass the stink test. I got to be honest with you. Really didn't. I mean, I love you to death. You know that. But I found that move, especially the first day, to be outrageous. And I understand what your position is, but you've got so much corruption going on. I mean, you look at the guy in Louisiana. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So we're out of time, but I appreciated your enaction of the Holman rule and your spirited defense of your colleague, Bob Goodlatte. Thank you.